Our next speaker has written a fantastic book called Walking the Talk, so she's here to talk about walking your talk. Please welcome Carolyn Taylor.
Good morning. How often do you find yourself thinking something like this? I wish my students would be more engaged or ask more questions, or I wish my family would pick up after themselves and contribute more. Or perhaps, I wish my team would be more able to share, more willing to share information with each other. Or perhaps I wish my organization people would do what they say they're going to do and keep their promises. I think we all do that. We wish that other people would behave differently because we can see the way people are behaving in whatever group we're a part of, and we know that we could be so much happier and so much more successful and achieve what it was we were trying to achieve by actually behaving differently. So I've come to talk to you today about culture, and I want to start by making a bold statement, which is that if you know how to shape a culture, then you can cause the people who live in that culture to change their behavior. So, for example, if you could build a culture of curiosity in your classroom or in your school or in your institution, then the people who lived in that classroom would actually start raising their hands more and asking more questions and being more engaged. Or if you could build a culture of respect in our families, then we would find that people in the family, our family members, would actually contribute more and give more to each other and chip in a bit more. Or in a team, if you can build a culture of collaboration, then people will start to share more. And if you can build a culture of accountability in your organization, then people will start to keep their word more. Because in fact, all of those groups, any group of which all of us are a member, already has a culture. It has a culture that was probably formed unconsciously, but the culture exists and it affects how we all operate in that culture. But the amazing thing about culture is that it's actually like a tide, a rising tide, that in fact it does lift everybody in it. And that's what's been so amazing for me in the work that I do on culture, is that when I see leaders who are able to build a certain type of culture, you see people in it start to lift to those standards. Almost everyone, not everybody. But the people who don't, interestingly, start to become much more marginalized. And some of them, in fact, if they have a choice, will end up by going. So the power of culture is it actually has that ability to cause a change in the behavior of other people. But it requires us as a leader to take responsibility and to take ownership of that. So what I'm going to do today is I'm actually going to give you some tips on how you can build a culture, whether it's in a classroom, whether it's in a school, whether it's in a broader institution, whatever group you're a member of, whatever group you feel that you can have an influence over. How can you actually build the culture that you want in that organization? So what I want to do to start with is to give you a bit of idea of what I've learned. And you may wonder sort of why me? Why have I been flown out from England to talk to you about this? Well, I've had the opportunity to actually work with culture all of my life. So I've been doing this for 30 years now, before culture was kind of recognized as something really important. And in the process, then, I've been able to work with literally hundreds of thousands of leaders who are trying to change their culture. And I've coached them, and I've seen what's worked, and I've also seen what hasn't worked. So I've got a pretty good sense now about what some of the tricks are, if you like, the things you can really focus on. And I'm hoping today that you'll be able to move away from this with one or two of those ideas that you can use personally. So the first thing I want to give you is a definition, which I've found to be the most useful definition, if you like, as to what a culture is. And that is that it is the patterns of behavior. So patterns of behavior, every classroom has a pattern of behavior about how people treat each other, how they treat you as the teacher, to what extent are they curious, how reliable are they in giving back or doing what they've been asked to do, etc. So there's a pattern of behavior, and that pattern of behavior gets encouraged and discouraged and tolerated by people, that is you, obviously, who are perhaps the leader of that group or the key people within the group who are considered to be important, and also by the system. So maybe the system of education, the way the classes are structured, the way that things are measured, all of those things. And that happens over a period of time. So over a period of time, any group will form a culture. And the trick I want to introduce you to today is how can you actually influence that culture? What are some of the practical things that you can do to do that? And in order to do that, I'd like you, and hope that each of you will just follow a little process with me now. First of all, to think about one group that you have a lot of time, you spend a lot of time with, that you care a lot about, and how you would like, which group would you like to choose to actually adopt a certain culture? So just have a group in your mind for a moment. And then the next question, and that group might be, for example, your organization or any of these. You can take this, you work for the macro level or at a macro level. The second question that I want to ask you then is, what type of culture do you want to create? So one of the first mistakes I find many leaders make is they try to change everything. They just want everything to be perfect. But I would love you to leave here today with one word that describes the kind of culture that you would like to create in this group that you're imagining. So I was thinking about education and thinking, I think, perhaps as I see it, I mean, you know far more about this than I do, but I see it, curiosity would be one that would be really important. Because for me, curiosity implies humility. It implies openness. It implies, I don't know everything now. I think Anthony said that Microsoft was seeking to become, a company of learners rather than knowers. For me, that's at the heart of curiosity. So a culture of curiosity would seem to be a powerful idea for this group. You could be going for a culture of collaboration. You could be going for a culture of kindness, or one of courage, or one of excellence. Any of those. But my strong recommendation is have one word, one idea that you say, I'm going to be known for this. I'm going to dedicate myself, perhaps over the next 12 months, to build this kind of culture in this group that I care about. And then the last question is, what are the behaviors then that would be most important in that culture that you want to build for this group? So you might say, so for example, if it was curiosity, you might say, well, I do want people to put their hands up. Or I want people to go and deliberately find out more from others who hold an opposite view from them. That would be a particular behavior. So come up with maybe, 2 or 3 behaviors. So you'll end up with 3 things then. Who is the group I want to influence? What is the culture? What is the one word which drives the kind of culture I want? And what are the behaviors that are most important? So once you've got that, now let's look at how do you actually go about doing that. So in order to understand how you go about doing it, you need to first of all understand how culture does get created. And culture gets created by the messages that all of us receive about what is valued around here. And most of those values are unconscious rather than conscious, which is why they come not from what people say, but they come from what people actually do. So people, because all of us are human beings and we want to fit into the communities of which we're a member, we read these signals. We're looking out for these signals all the time. And when we find them, we sort of start to adapt our behavior to fit that. So there are 3 sources of those behaviors. One are the behaviors of other people. So for example, particularly role models or leaders are important in that regard. The second are symbols. So symbols are things like how time is spent. So for example, if you only have an hour, how much you dedicate in that hour to one topic rather than another topic. How much do you talk at people? How much do you encourage questions? If you change that percentage, what you're doing, in fact, is you're sending a symbol which says, I now value something different. Maybe I value more your opinion and not just my own. And the third thing that really drives the culture are the systems. Systems in your case would be something like the system of education or the structure of a program that you're designing, or the way that things get measured. So the kind of the processes by which people within that group operate. So those are the three ideas that you need to have. And then if you think about, okay, what would I personally like to do? I wanted to offer you three ideas. Three ideas really which say, how can you walk your talk? Because in the end, as a leader, it's what you do and how you start that process that leads everybody else. I know it's easy to kind of blame other people, and we all do it, but really the first place is to look at yourself. So three things. The first thing is, are you role modeling it yourself? Now, I know we all say, yeah, of course I'm curious all the time. And I was actually thinking, sitting down there this morning, what does curiosity mean for me at a very personal level? So curiosity means, did I spend the time before I came up here to talk to you, in the back room thinking about what I was going to say? Or did I spend the time out there with people who were coming in, being curious about what it was that they were here for? And I've asked a few of you actually already, so what did you come here for? So that's curious. So there are these little things as an individual that we think we may be doing, but maybe not. So definitely holding out a mirror in terms of what do I personally do, and how much can you engender and encourage in the group you're trying to change the culture, that in terms of your own behavior. The second one then is at the we level, about how you engage with other people. And that definition that I gave of culture, which was that you encourage and discourage and don't tolerate certain things. I can't emphasize enough how important that is in order to influence other people's behavior. So I know for myself personally, for example, when I am facilitating a group, and I'm looking for people to ask questions, and the first time I hear somebody ask the type of question that I'm looking for, i.e. open and, really wanting to learn rather than, just using an excuse to talk about how clever they are, I will make a really big deal about it, so I'll say, that is exactly the sort of question that I'm hoping for. Thank you for that question. So I kind of exaggerate that ability, that encouragement, so that and what happens is after I do that 2 or 3 times, I find that other members of the group start copying that, because people do want to fit in. My daughter is actually an actress, and she tells me that when you're on stage in a theater, you have to amplify every gesture that you make, and they put big makeup on. And they do that because you've got to make big gestures in order to demonstrate that you are signaling that this is what I want. This is what I want in my culture. And the second thing also is not tolerating. And that one, of course, is more difficult for all of us. Quite a lot of work I do is in the organizational space. And I remember an organization I worked with recently, a mining organization. They had this great, really, really top supervisor in one of their mines. And he was speeding one of the trucks on the site. And they fired him instantly. And the reason they did that, and what they said is, we have to, in order to create a culture of safety, we have to never walk past an unsafe behavior. We have to never tolerate it. So really, if you're really going to build a culture, not only do you have to get very good at encouraging, but you also have to get very good at not tolerating, which is why I always encourage people to only focus on one pattern, one type of culture at a time, because frankly, just being able to encourage and discourage curiosity is quite a lot if you're going to get really intense about it in order to produce a change within, say, a 12-month period, which is definitely doable if you do get focused enough. So that's the second piece that you have to do. And then the third thing that you have to do is to look at how can you redesign kind of what I call at the it level. So for example, how you structure as you design a curriculum, as you design any class, as you design anything. The question I would be asking, I think, would be, what behavior is this design going to encourage? To what extent is the structure of the way that you are educating actually going to encourage certain behaviors and not others? To what extent is the way that you are measuring people going to encourage some behaviors and not others? So those would be the 3 opportunities that I would see any one of you in this room as having to shape the culture of the organization that, of the organization, I tend to work with organizations rather, but to shape the culture of the group of which you are most interested. And I do really want to encourage you, because I do work with so many different types of groups, to say that if you focus on just one or two things and really apply this, and look in the mirror at yourself and take responsibility and say, I can cause this behavior to change by doing some combination of this, you can produce significant changes. And we've got all sorts of measurements in terms of how to actually measure that, but significant changes in the behavior of any group, whether it's as small as your family. You can come back to me as to whether you have any success on that one, in terms of getting kids to whatever, contribute more, wash up more, pick things up more. But you can have a go there if you want to test it out. Can you build more of that kind of respect in your family? But also in your classroom, in your institution, in your school. And some of you will have, you will be in a position of strong influence because you're leading that group. And others, maybe you're just a member of that group. But even if you're just a member of that group, I invite you not to give up, because I have seen extraordinary culture changes happening, started by groups in the middle of an organization, in the middle of a team, in the middle of a small group, who said, we are not going to be satisfied with this until we see a change in what the patterns of behavior are, and gradually building up from there. So as you may gather from what I'm saying, this has been my mission for a long time. And my whole career I've spent in finding ways to help leaders of different types to change their culture, because I've always felt that it was a shortcut. It was the missing piece. We tend to look at the behavior of individuals, but we don't spend enough time looking at the behavior of a whole culture. And within doing that, then, two things I would like to leave you with if you're interested in finding out more. As Adam said, I wrote a book called Walking Your Talk, which is primarily about how you change an organization, how you change the culture of a larger group, of a group of maybe sort of 50 up. If you're part of an organization that's like that, I would encourage you to look at that. And then the second thing I've just started, which you might find interesting, is a podcast called Walking Your Talk, which is much more personal. It really is. I learned something this morning from Anthony. I think I am a personal transformation educator, I think he called it. So it's really a personal journey about what can you do personally to walk your talk more. So if you'd like to check in on that, please do so. And obviously, if you ever want to link here on me, I'd be happy to get into a communication with you on that. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure to meet you all, and I hope that I'm able to help.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Thank you very much, Carolyn Taylor.